Leading up to the 1st century, the Roman Empire was still in its infancy, born out of the ashes of the old Republic following a terrible civil war. Octavian, now known as Augustus, had declared himself emperor, and in the years that followed, Rome's gaze occasionally turns to Britain. That far-off land of dangerous chariot-riding barbarians. The Roman conquest of Britain didn't happen overnight, and the famous invasion is a long way off. So what happened in the meantime? And what went wrong? Let's find out. But before we do, I'll briefly mention that the Britons were no strangers to the might of the Roman Republic, as the legendary Julius Caesar had invaded almost 50 years prior, paving the way for the eventual integration into Rome. And even before then, the Britons had dealings with Rome via the Gauls. And trade was strong, especially in the south of England. Roman wines and luxury goods had long been traded, for British tin and other valuable resources. The archaeology supports this. All that's really changed is the collapse of the Hengistbury Head trade route to Gaul and its shift to the Thames area. And when the legions of Caesar did arrive, not everyone opposed them. In fact, some tribes joined them, like the Trinobantes and the Cerimagni, leaving the Cunobelinus tribe to fight them off. After all, the Britons had a long history of infighting, especially between the Trinobantes and the Cunobelinus, who were bitter enemies. Caesar had exploited this. Another faction had also emerged around that time, because in Gaul, Caesar had installed a puppet king of the Atrebates tribe, King Commius. But in 52 BC, he opposed Caesar before being defeated. So King Commius flees to Britain to set up his oppidum in Caligula, which is modern-day Silchester. Okay, you're going to ask it, what is an oppidum? Well, for the last couple of centuries, the tribal chiefs, the kings and everything, had lived in oppida, which are large fortified settlements. The age of the old hill forts is pretty much at an end. It's pretty much the hub of everything, and summer capitals of the territories of the tribes. And inside of these oppidums, even the old round houses are pretty much replaced by now by rectangular ones. Things are changing. Even when Caesar left, he'd conquer the Gauls, meaning the Britons were now right on the edge of the Roman frontier, right on the borders. Informally, as Gaul wasn't truly integrated, but they were still crushed, militarily. Now Britons could trade directly with the Republic, and trade was booming. Though the old Roman Republic itself wouldn't last much longer. Torn down by Emperor Augustus following a bitter civil war, and replaced with something far greater, the Roman Empire. Now, returning back to Britain, the king of the Cunobelinus tribe around the time of Caesar was Cunobelinus, a powerful man on a territorial expansion. During the conflict, he had bogged the Romans down into a stalemate, followed by a truce. And when the Romans went, they took hostages, the sons of the tribal leaders, to ensure peace with Rome. These children would grow up learning the Roman ways and Roman customs. This is paving the way for assimilation into the empire. We don't really know what happened to Cunobelinus, but his son, Didymaros, becomes king of the Cunobelini. And as we enter the years of Anno Domini, the tribe appears to be led by the son of Didymaros, a king called Taciovanus. Now, not much is written about Taciovanus, and most of what we do know about him comes from coins bearing his name. Coins that were minted in what was once Trinovantes territory, an oppidum called Velamium. This tells us that the infighting between the tribes was still ongoing. It also tells us that the Cunobelinus tribe had renewed their campaign of expansion. So, what was their place on the world stage? Didymaros and Taciovanus. Were any of these two hostages of Rome at any given time? Makes you wonder. Romanization is certainly going on during this period, and these kings certainly had connections to Rome. Also, currently, the adopted son of Julius Caesar now rules the new Roman Empire. Emperor Augustus. Given he's won a civil war and torn down the Republic, and has an army hardened in battle, would he use it against the barbarians on the frontier? Would the Romans return to Britain? So it makes sense that the Britons wanted peace with Rome, when after all they had enjoyed trade for well over a century. So why spoil things? And around this time, that star appears, the same one the three men followed from the east. And despite what the movies depict, the Britons were not a bunch of cavemen in Paleolithic fantasy attire. No. By now, many of the nobility are shaving and bathing just like the Romans, drinking Mediterranean wines, and the only thing they're not doing is wearing togas. Given the weather, can you blame them? They're still wearing traditional Iron Age garb. They're riding chariots of war, carrying swords and shields. Even the Cunobelinus, who once fought Rome to a stalemate, had begun adopting some Roman imagery. And now I'm not saying that you'd mistake these tribes for Romans. Far from it. They are still ancient Celts in every way, shape or form. They just enjoyed some parts of Roman life. From the wine to the jewellery. So, if you look closely, you can see the influence of the Mediterranean in the appearance of the rich, especially in the ones with closer connections to the Roman Empire. And I'll remind you that Boudica, she's not even born yet. Even though the tribes of pre-Roman Britain got back to their usual infighting, many prominent tribal leaders sent emissaries to Rome, paying tribute to the new emperor. The Greco-Roman writer, Strabo, is contemporary to this period, and he explains that the Romans themselves see the barbarians becoming closer to the state. He also notes that the Romans considered Britain as their territory, their property. Strabo recalled the Britons as giving so much in duties that they would have to be relaxed if tribute was going to be paid. Should Rome play its cards right, well, then the Britons would still pay their dues and no military garrison would be needed there. Look at it from Rome's perspective. It had taken military might and much coin to finally subdue Gaul, let alone the tribes of Germania. They were far from subdued. Soon, 3 legions would be wiped out at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. Varus, give me back my legions! Ironically, the Romans introduced rabbits to Britain, and Caesar Augustus wasn't a happy one. Horrible loss. Yet, here were the Britons, barbarians from a far-off distant land, right at the edge of the empire. They were in Rome, paying tribute to Emperor Augustus willingly, witnessing the advanced Mediterranean civilization firsthand, and no doubt returning to Britain with tales of the wonders they had seen. It was very good advertising for Rome. Especially when it seems that Augustus was willing to treat Britain as part of the larger empire. Sure, there was no doubt that he planned to invade at some point in time. He certainly planned multiple invasions. The last thing he wanted is the Britons to get the upper hand. But that was around 40 years ago. Currently, there was no need to invade Britain. They were already as subdued as they were going to be. Britain was a client state, at least as far as the Roman Emperor was concerned, and he was going to make sure it stayed that way. And having the Roman Empire as a patron was such a boost of prestige. Should the Brigantes decide to get involved in the affairs of the Cativaloni or the Trinovantes? In theory, they could expect a knock on the proverbial door from a legion or two of Roman troops, spawning for a fight. And should the clients quarrel with the Brigantes? Well, more territory for the ever-expanding Roman Empire. Also, the Romans were not above putting a guardian in client states, an official to help things run smoothly, usually a native, but one who's firmly supporting of Rome. So already we're getting a picture, and we're still around 30 years off from the famous invasion of Claudius, around 50 years off from Boudicca's rebellion. Yet Britain is far from some backwater, devoid of Roman contact. Okay, yeah, backwater, yes, but devoid, God no. The Romans were here, if even in presence only, and the traders who toed and froed for the Mediterranean were highly familiar with Rome. There would have been a good amount of intermarrying, all part of the inevitable integration, maybe even supplying troops for the larger empire, slaves. And would any of these child hostages have grown up and taken Roman partners? Did this happen? It's all murky, lost to history, but it is clear that we didn't suddenly become Romanized when Claudius invaded. Far from it. We were friends of Rome. Admittedly by tribute and quid pro quo, but so far everything was going smoothly. And besides, the Britons loved their infighting, their power struggles, and Augustus was more than willing to get involved, meddling in foreign affairs. He could affect the outcome of a tribal squabble all the way from his palace in Rome. Such that in 7 AD, 2 British kings, fed up with all the infighting, packed up and headed for Rome for the protection of the emperor. It was beneficial for them to sacrifice some independence for the sake of a larger reward. These 2 kings were Tincomarus, from the once Gallic Atrebates, and Dubnovellanos, from the Canticii tribe. These 2 chaps are mentioned among the other rulers who fled to Rome in the famous Res Gestae. We don't really know for sure why they had fled Britannia, but it's most likely due to the infighting. Tincomarus also claimed to be the son of Commius, although it is unknown whether this was the Commius who personally knew Julius Caesar over 50 years ago and ended up rebelling before fleeing to Britannia, thus starting the Atrebate tribe, or another by the same name. As in, did Commius have a child called Commius, or was it just a common name at the time? Was Tincomarus lying? Whatever the case, he was in Rome, and apparently the tribe put his brother Apellius in charge, and it was Apellius who was recognised by King Augustus, who is clearly playing politics. Now, as we know, the head of the Caligula tribe is Tacianus. We're heading towards the end of his reign as tribal leader. He's already considered Rex by the Romans, which means king. We don't know exactly how powerful he was, and so little is known about him, but coins exist from other areas boasting his name, so he's got to be pretty powerful. Around 14 AD, the leader of the tribe is Cunobelinus, so we can assume that Tacianus has passed away, and Cunobelinus is minting Roman coins, using Roman letters, Roman styles. He's embracing many of the Roman ways. This is pretty significant, as when looked alongside his pro-Roman policies, did he have an education in Rome? Okay, those children who were taken by Caesar, that was like 70 years ago by now. They'd long got older, and since then many other so-called hostages were surrendered to Rome, each child receiving Roman education. Even if the peasantry of Britain are still going by the old ways, the ruling class were lapping up the Roman culture. And looking by the coins of Cunobelinus, we're seeing a clean-shaven man with short hair. A stark contrast from the hairy barbarians portrayed in any media. Also, he might not have been the sole ruler of the Caligula, as Apatticus, his brother, also has coinage in these territories, pushing into the Berkshire area, where the Atrebates tribe are based, possibly pointing at further infighting and further expansion of the Caligula. Cunobelinus also has 3 sons. Adminius, he's the eldest, Togoduminus, and Graticus, all pushing this pro-Roman policy. And Cunobelinus will be king for many years to come, continuing his territorial expansions to the east and to the west, no doubt putting the fight to the Trinovantes and the Atrebate. Around this time, there was political change in Rome, as the elderly Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire, passes away. But if Tacitus and Dio are any reliable resources, I mean we know they are, then they claim that his wife Livia Drusilla had poisoned him. It's more likely an overactive rumour mill, and they're just noting what the rumours were. Rumours fabricated by her political enemies, and she would have had many, as the emperor was already in ill health by this point. Either way, next in line was Tiberius Caesar Augustus, a distinguished hero who'd been bestowed the title of princeps, and much like Augustus, who himself was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, Tiberius was the adopted son of Augustus. Tiberius becomes the second emperor of Rome, albeit reluctantly, and Tiberius appears to be just letting the Britons get on with it. He doesn't seem to have any intention of invasion, nor playing an active role in power politics. There is a tale that a Roman ship arrived in Britain and saw monsters, but outside of that it's business as usual with the client state on the very fringe of the empire. And the most powerful tribe in Britain is still the Cunobelinus, who are ruled by Cunobelinus, who reigns from around 9 AD to around 40 AD. His reign is pretty much parallel with Emperor Tiberius. And wily old Cunobelinus is making further expansions into the south. His brother Epatecus's military campaign against the Atrebates had resulted in the capture of the capital Oppidum, Caligula, though we know it today as Silchester. It also looks like the Trinovantes are getting hammered and now is encroaching on the Iceni territory up in Norfolk. And it is funny that the Cunobelinus once viciously defied Julius Caesar almost a century ago, as right now they couldn't be more Romanized. Although they are pushing it a bit, because they are battering other client states without fear of reprisal. Remember that the Trinovantes, the Atrebates, the Canisii, Iceni, they are just as much in the pocket of Rome as the Cunobelinus. In the past, rival kings have fled to Rome for protection. Even one of Cunobelinus' own sons would soon flee to Rome in exile. Rome, however, doesn't seem to be paying attention to any of this, not under Tiberius. And Cunobelinus is acting like some sort of mafia godfather. He's got Rome behind him. He's powerful, dangerously so. He can do whatever he wants, take whatever he wants. His empire is the centre of trade in Britain. And as far as the Romans are concerned, Cunobelinus is the king of the Britons. The Roman Empire didn't really need a military presence here. They had Cunobelinus. He pretty much was their garrison, in all but name. But things were about to change, and Rome would soon wish it had done so. Because the relationship between Britannia and Rome would turn sour. I'll start with Cunobelinus' son, Adminius. We do not know why he sent him into exile. Was the Cunobelinus king truly loyal to Rome? Was his son up to no good? Or was Cunobelinus already breaking off from Rome and sending his Romanized son into exile? Unlike Augustus, Tiberius had taken his eye off the ball, and Cunobelinus seems to be exploiting this. But Tiberius is old, and soon the mantle of emperor passes to the popular Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, probably the most second famous Roman in history. We know him by his nickname, Caligula. And the year is 37 AD. Back in Britain, towards the end of Cunobelinus' reign, you find coins bearing the letters AGR. As to what this means, we could only speculate, but people suggested it means Agrippa, as it doesn't appear to represent any Celtic name. Now, we know Cunobelinus did in fact rule alongside his brother, but is he now ruling alongside his son? Is that son, this Agrippa, educated in Rome and firmly in the pocket of the empire? The problem is, Cunobelinus' sons are known: Adminius, Tugadunus, and Graticus. There's no Agrippa. So what was it then? A title? A nickname? Something else? We know that Rome put guardians in client states. Was Agrippa a guardian? Important enough to have his own name on coins? We don't know. It's all speculation. Could have been another name for Adminius, if you want my honest personal opinion. And it is frustrating that there is no clarification in historical records. It is too insignificant for the Romans to notice, and the Celts, they're still not writing their own history. All we do know comes from writers like Dio, Tacitus and Josephus. And this Agrippa vanishes as soon as he came. On the subject of people who vanish, let's get into Adminius. It is around now that he is sent into exile by his father and flees to Rome for the protection of the emperor. This emperor being Caligula. But Caligula is busy planning his invasion into Germania, and Adminius's pleas are ignored. All that came out of this meeting between him and Caligula are the emperor sending a letter to Rome declaring that all of Britannia has submitted to him. And by this time, the once popular Caligula is displaying the psychotic behaviour he is famous for. He's no longer popular. As for Adminius, the exiled son is never heard from again. He vanishes from the pages of history. Now, I am not saying it was Caligula. More likely, Adminius went his own way and just wasn't important enough for the Romans to write about. Though Caligula has murdered people for the slightest things, including having a nice purple cloak that was better than his. That's the problem with ancient history. We just don't know. And rogue factors like Caligula just make it even more difficult. Should it have been Augustus or Tiberius? Or Julius Caesar? No one would have batted an eyelid. But add a psychopath to the mix? Yeah. Around this time of 40 AD, Cunobelinus dies, and his two sons, Tugadumnus and Caratacus, take the reins, all pushing this pro-Roman policy. But between the year 40 and 43, Tugadumnus would also die, leaving Caratacus as the sole king of the Britons. And Rome was about to find out what happens when you let a wound fester. Caligula, at least, it seems to have noticed something was going wrong, as he plans an invasion into Britain. Then, in 40 AD, he crossed the empire with a sizable force to the edge of Gaul. There, he prepared all his war machines, his ballista, the lot, along the beach, and pontificated. He then orders his men to collect seashells as trophies and put them in their helmets. He then erected a tower to guide the light to the ships over the sea. And then he left, in his eyes having enslaved the ocean. Britain was conquered. Apparently he even whipped it, the sea that is. They must have been doing this for some time, as Caligula is mentioned, overseeing his men in a robe of Venus and also in armour, suggesting different times. And the Roman chroniclers that recorded this were just as perplexed as we are. They couldn't make sense of this either. The emperor's gone potty. Caratacus certainly wasn't impressed. He doesn't appear to have given a monkey's, and pressed on with his expansion of territory. And as for Caligula, he's fallen deeper and deeper into the psychotic depravity he's famous for. He's making a lot of enemies. Right, the Praetorian Guard regarded Caligula as a liability to Rome, and on the 24th of January 41 AD, they assassinated him, abruptly ending his cruel reign of terror. Making sure his line was ended proper, they hunted down and murdered his wife and 1-year-old daughter. They were being thorough, and they also aimed to slay his uncle. But by luck, the uncle, Claudius, would escape death, and soon he was elected the 4th Emperor of Rome. Oh, and Claudius would have his revenge on the assassins. They were executed, each and every one of them. As for Craticus, he's given it a bit of Harry the Pickle. He continues this expansion of territories, pressing his might into the Atrebates, crushing them, forcing their king, Verica, to flee to Rome. No doubt whinging to Emperor Claudius. After all, he was a client king. He was supposed to have protection against this silliness. The historian Dio claims that Vericus, the Atrebates chap, was overthrown by his own people during a revolt. A revolt that was without doubt a consequence of their catastrophic loss to Craticus and the Cativiloni. At this point, the King of the Britons is going hog wild with these expansions. His capital is now Camulodunum, Colchester, in Essex. As far as the Romans are concerned, Cunobelinus may have been the king of the Britons, but the apple had fallen far from the tree. Until now, Britain was well known in the inner circles of Rome's politics, but something was going on that the Romans should really have been paying attention to. And Emperor Claudius would be paying full attention to the crisis. Also, he was not his predecessor. He'd prepare an invasion force to cross the Channel from Gaul to Britannia. And, unlike a century before, under Caesar, this was no CV update to impress the folks at home. This was an invasion of conquest. Thank you for watching.